we'll proceed to vote. All senators voted. Lock the board and record the vote.
39 yeas, 0 nays, Madam President.
So the bill passes. Read the next bill.
Committee substitute for committee substitute for committee substitute for Senate Bill 1346, a bill to be entitled an act relating to local regulation of non-conforming or unsafe structures.
Senator of the 39th District, Senator Avila, is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam President. And Senators, this bill ensures that unsafe structures can be replaced with new resilient structures. Specifically, the bill only applies to non-conforming buildings in FEMA coastal high hazard areas which fail to meet FEMA standards for new construction. Also, buildings that are deemed unsafe by the local building agency and buildings ordered to be demolished by the local building official. If a building is in one of these situations, it should be able to be rebuilt in a resilient manner according to typical local building codes and zoning laws. The bill does not apply to single-family homes and does not apply to structures individually listed in the National Register of Historic Places. That is the bill, Madam President.
Are there amendments?
On the desk, Madam President.
Read the first amendment.
Late filed amendment barcode 745334 by Senator Avila. Delete everything after the enacting clause and insert amendment.
Senator Avila, you're recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam President. And Senators, the amendment adds additional structures that would not be affected by the bill to include structures within a municipality that has a total population of 10,000 or less as of the most recent census, as well as structures within a municipality with at least 3 buildings that are over 200 years old. The amendment uses a C word of the coastal construction control line instead of half-mile of the coastline to qualify the affected areas. The amendment also provides that applications for replacement structures must be processed in accordance with the local government's land development regulations, which may include public hearings before the local historic board. That is the amendment.
There's an amendment to the amendment. Read the amendment to the amendment.
Late filed amendment to the amendment barcode 722652 by Senator Powell. Delete line 40 and insert amendment.
Senator Powell, you're recognized to explain the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, Senators, in the current language, after tearing a building down, developers would automatically be authorized to build a new structure on the site at the maximum height and density for which the area is zoned. Local governments would otherwise have little to no say in what building is being placed there or what it looks like, including whether it is a replica of the original structure. This amendment expands the exemption for qualifying structures and buildings to match the Florida Building Code definitions regarding historic buildings that either fall within a National Register of Historic District or is individually designated as a local historic site or located within the local historic district. Madam President, that is the amendment.
Are there any questions on the amendment to the amendment? Is there any debate on the amendment to the amendment? Senator Avila?
Thank you, Madam President. My good friend, Senator Powell, thank you for filing the amendment. Unfortunately, it is unfriendly. The amendment speaks to preserving those structures that are locally designated. The issue is that some of the municipalities, and I'll give an example in terms of Miami Beach, have designated 2,600 structures, while the National Register has designated 7. Clearly, there's a big discrepancy between what the National Register has designated as truly historic and what the local historic board has deemed historic. Senators, I encourage you to vote down this bill. Unfortunately, not even though these structures are important to the municipality, they cannot all be historic. For that, I ask for you to not support this amendment.
Senator Powell, you recognize to close on the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Avila. I would ask members to maybe vote for the bill, but just hold your concern with regard to the amendment. This amendment, of course, Senator Jones is not here today, and I want to make sure that I file this amendment because it's important to him in a certain area that he represents in Miami. Senators, I would appreciate your support, as this would be a preemption. This good amendment, without it, additional language, thousands of historic buildings, as Senator Avila mentioned, will lose their designation and could be demolished at any time. While the bill includes protections against the demolition, if it is determined that raising a building poses a threat to public safety, an exemption for single-family homes and sites on the National Historic Register, as well as still the more than 2,600 that are identified in the city's historic preservation regulation, the bill would potentially imperil. Thank you for this opportunity to explain this amendment. And with that, I would ask for your favorable support.
All in favor of the amendment to the amendment, say yea. Yea. Opposed, say nay. No. The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. So we're back on the main amendment 745334 by Senator Avila. Are there any questions on that amendment? Senator Pizzo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. So my understanding from your presentation, Senator Avila, is that this will permit municipalities that have a population of 10,000 or fewer to be exempt from this preemption?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. That is correct, Senator Pizzo.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. What's the nexus between population and preempting removal of structures?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for that question, Senator Pizzo. With less of a population, you're more likely to have more of these structures that are unsafe within that particular jurisdiction. So you're less likely to run into that situation.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. Following up on that, just again, what's the correlation, I guess I'm asking, between the number of people living in an area and the safety of structures located within that area? I mean, is your answer to the previous question to suggest that large cities are worse or better at maintaining the safety of structures?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Pizzo, for that question. Certainly what we've seen is that the larger cities have, for several reasons, which I cannot necessarily speak to, have given authority to some of the boards, particularly their historic preservation boards. And these larger cities, by doing that, have empowered these boards to essentially take punitive actions with the owners that would want to demolish an unsafe structure, even with the local building official saying that it's unsafe, even with the local building department saying that it should be demolished.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. I would proffer to you that sometimes what current city boundaries were sort of more porous or invisible in years past. So you're familiar with my district and my previous district is now largely represented by Senator Jones. Just if you would, give me a little comfort on, take a place like Surfside, which has less than 10,000 people, but is contiguous as you drive, and if you're not from the area and you're on Collins, goes right into Miami Beach, or vice versa into Bal Harbor, which also has a smaller population. What's a distinctive difference between a city like Surfside and Miami Beach as it relates to an historic structure? Are you saying that Miami Beach, because it's a bigger city, has more boards and more sort of artificial bureaucracy to create restrictions that would otherwise not have a board in a place like Surfside or Bal Harbor?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. And yes, Senator Pizzo, that's been my observation. Certainly, with you pointed to several municipalities in Miami-Dade County. One of them certainly being Miami Beach. At one point in 2012, there was even a ballot referendum that spoke to reducing the powers of the historic board, by which 61% of the residents in Miami Beach supported reducing the powers that were given to the historic board by the local municipality.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you, Madam President. Let's get out of the area that you and I live in. How about a place like around St. Augustine, where there might be municipalities with smaller populations? Aren't we sort of saying they may not have national historic designations, but because of the population size of certain areas, we're going to allow them to go ahead and not be preempted from taking down what they're deeming locally now as historic structures?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Pizzo, for that question. What we're saying is we certainly are not devaluing historic sites. Quite the contrary. I think we all in this building, certainly as it relates to St. Augustine, we certainly enjoy visiting St. Augustine. We certainly enjoy visiting and seeing those historic sites. But there are some structures that are not historic, not in St. Augustine. I'm saying in areas maybe around St. Augustine on the coast that have become unsafe over the years with hurricanes, with certainly erosion and other factors being that close to the shoreline. So with that, those structures have become unsafe and become hazardous. And we actually have had numerous discussions in Leader Albritton's committee on the Committee of Resiliency that spoke to that. And these structures are consistently, they're taking a lot of damage, and they're being, they're really just being a threat to public safety. So that's what this bill speaks to.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. But with this amendment, you're allowing those municipalities that may have that unsafe condition to be exempt from state preemption of what to do with those buildings.
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Pizzo, for that question. So again, what I've seen is the problem is not in these smaller municipalities, because those local jurisdictions are not empowering the boards. Where you're seeing this more are in the larger coastal cities and municipalities that have, for whatever reason, empowered the local boards rather than keeping those decisions up to the local municipality.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me ask it this way. If you have a city that has a population of 7,000 and has one particular structure that was built at the exact same time as another structure that was built in a city that has a population of 90,000, your amendment, does it not, allows the smaller city to control their own destiny as it relates to the building, regardless of condition, as opposed to the city with a population of 90,000 with the exact same type of structure that now is preempted by your amendment, by this bill?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Pizzo, for that. So under the amendment, what I'm saying is yes to your question, but where you're seeing the problem is in the larger municipalities, not in the smaller municipalities on the coast.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. Do you know if Florida has a state historic preservation board?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for that question, Senator Pizzo. I do know that the Department of State, they make determinations on historic landmarks in the state of Florida.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. Does this bill effectively preempt the purview and authority now of that state historic preservation board? And I ask in the context of a particular structure might not have a national historic designation, but Florida may have designated a structure as historic. And since your bill seems to read only if it's a national historic heritage site, doesn't your bill now preempt even the state's board for those designations and authority over structures?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Pizzo, for that. So it would have to be deemed by the National Registry of Historic Places to be a historic place, by which that structure would not fall under this bill.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you, Madam President. So I just want to be clear, your bill is now completely preempting all of the designations of Florida's historic preservation.
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for that question, Senator Pizzo. Again, to clarify, there's a process that needs to take place with the bill and with this amendment. If that building or that structure is deemed unsafe by the local building official, if it is deemed that it needs to be demolished by that local building department, again, all at the jurisdiction level, all at the city municipal level, as well as it is clearly in a flood zone area as deemed by FEMA standards, then what the bill and the amendment speak to is that the owner of that property should not be penalized in any way, shape, or form to demolish an unsafe structure. It's not calling for any extra benefit. It's just saying that there should not be, whether it's a board or that local jurisdiction, should not penalize that owner of that structure.
Senator Pizzo.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to do this by deductive reasoning here. So here's my final question. Regardless of how incredibly unsafe a structure might be, if it's got a sticker from the National Historic Preservation Board, then we can't do anything about it. I mean, even if death, danger, and injury are imminent, building officials have no authority over that structure because it's got a sticker on it from a National Historic Preservation Board. I mean, does that make sense? If it's about life safety, if it's about unsafe structures and repetitive flooding and danger and an issue, should it be uniform for every structure? Shouldn't it be based on the safety of the structure and not whether or not it was able to successfully petition and receive the badge of the National Historic Preservation?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for that, Senator Pizzo. In looking at many of these historic structures, I have not encountered one that has been deemed unsafe or that has been deemed to be demolished. I haven't come across that.
Any other questions on the amendment? Is there any debate on the amendment? Senator Avila, you're recognized to close on the amendment. Or not. All those in favor of the amendment say yay. Yay. Opposed say nay. The amendment is adopted. Are there any further questions on the bill? Senator Avila moves the bill be read the third. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Polsky, recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. So I think many of us have received emails from folks who are upset, and there was a Herald article that talked about this bill. Can you ease everyone's mind as to what the bill does, and that the people who've been writing into us shouldn't be as concerned as they seem to be?
Senator Avila.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Polsky, for that question. So I would say this again. This does absolutely nothing to. Ocean Drive is not going to get bulldozed, for one, right? According to that article, that is not going to happen. We're simply talking about structures that have been deemed unsafe by the local building official, that have been deemed that they should be demolished by the local building department, and that are in a FEMA flood zone area. So those are the three criteria for those structures. Now, given the concerns that I've heard in previous committees from Senator Jones, Senator Pizzo, Senator Garcia, and others, we actually brought down, with the definition in the amendment, to the coastal line, the coastal construction line, the CCL. We actually brought that back in terms of the distance from a half mile to basically a quarter mile or less. So the impact is really on those structures that have taken a lot of damage over time, that have been decaying over time, and really if the local jurisdiction and their officials have said, hey, this structure is hazardous and is unsafe, then the property owner should be able to demolish it without being penalized in any way, shape, or form. Some of the things that are happening are that these historic boards are essentially making the property owner, or telling the property owner, that they have to build either a replica or that they have to build to the same specs as that structure in the 1950s or 1960s. Now that, that property owner, if they rebuild a structure, it'll be in accordance with that local process that's in place, and they would have to work with the local historical board for that new structure. But they shouldn't be penalized and basically told you need to build it to these exact specs. And that's what this bill is trying to prevent.
Senator Polsky. Any further questions on the bill? Senator Avila moves that the bill be read the third time. All in favor of the motion to read the bill the third time, say yea. Yay. Opposed, say nay. The motion is adopted. Read the bill.
Committee substitute for committee substitute for committee substitute for Senate Bill 1346, a bill to be entitled an act relating to local regulation of nonconforming or unsafe structures.
Is there debate on the bill? Senator Pizzo, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam President. So before I even ever thought about running for office, I was in the space where we would encounter projects, sometimes redevelopment, infill, the urban infill, and I would be a huge proponent of this bill because some of the things that locals would ask us to do, it's like, you guys just formed the board last week, right? You formed the board last week to determine that this optometrist office is like of local lore, and he was the first doctor in the city. And I would be on the proponent side of this. And do I think that there needs to be a balance between sort of overreaching to a large extent? When you tell me the number that there's 2,600 of them just in the confines of the city of Miami Beach, that at first blush absolutely strikes me as being excessive, okay? And then something my dad used to say to these people who were just so gung-ho and about these historic places that were locally historic, he would say, listen, this property wasn't just for sale to me. You guys all could have got together as this group that's now coming after us, and you could have bought it. And you could have done whatever you wanted with it, and you could have reinforced it, and as if it was always the Coliseum or the Pantheon, right? But this is where the pendulum kind of swings too far, and this is sort of where I'm articulating what my position is. We have received a lot of communications from cities and commissions. One thing that I received was from Mayor Archibald Ryan IV of Dania Beach. Ever so mindful, I know Senator Albritton, who I owe a great deal of thanks to for spending 7 hours with me a couple weeks ago as we try to come up with an emergency response plan for Broward County, it reads, as one of the cities affected by the 1,000-year storm event of April 12, 2023, the city of Dania Beach recognizes the effects of sea level rise and flooding. The city knows that flooding is a serious issue that may require adaptation and resiliency changes to the building codes, but these issues should not result in the destruction of home rule authority, nor should local history be destroyed out of a desire for expediency relating to flooding issues rather than finding compromise and adaptation measures. The benchmark for me since serving here was a bill that we had. It was a House bill that we took up, 717. And it was the plastic straw ordinance that was in Key Biscayne. And I remember the governor vetoed it. And he said, you know what? This is a local issue. And if this enrages or upsets the people locally, well, then they have the opportunity to go vote people in later on who will not pass plastic straw ordinances. And so I guess if you're citing a 2012 ballot referendum of 61% of the electorate looking and seeking to reduce the authority of some of these boards, well, then the message really should be to these local municipalities, if these things are really of concern and bother you one way or the other, make sure you elect people locally who will disband boards like this that they think are overreaching and abusing these sort of privileges. The problem is that this is a bit of a hammer on a bug issue. It's the pendulum swinging a little too far I don't disagree with the philosophy of the bill. I think people and organizations and entities newly formed all the time to actually frustrate the highest and best use for property. I know that empirically, and I agree with you, right? But I think there definitely needs to be a compromise. Just saying 10,000 or fewer is completely inequitable when we have neighboring contiguous cities that have population under 10,000. It's just not fair, right? And again, there's no nexus to the safety of the structure, it's population size. I can't arrive at a conclusion on that hypothesis that there's actually really any clear nexus. I'm a yes on the philosophy of it. I just think as the pendulum swings, the 20 cities I represent, almost 80% of which would be considered coastal, is unworkable and too much of a preemption at this time.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam President. Senators, I am the founder of the Wells-Built Museum of African American History and Culture in Orlando. And it operates in a building that opened in 1929. It was formerly a hotel, and it was the only place where African Americans could stay during segregation in the state of Florida. The nonprofit that I worked with to salvage that hotel when it was slated for demolition worked with the Trust for Public Land to restore that structure. It is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and many of the historic figures who lived there were entertainers such as Cab Calloway, Ray Charles, Billie Holiday, you name it, and they stayed at the Wells-Built Hotel. And I think we need to move very cautiously when we say that there are structures that are unsafe, particularly if they have historic value. Rather than seeing that structure demolished, we rehabilitated it, and today it operates as a museum. It was listed in the Negro Motorist Green Book, which started publishing in 1936 and published until 1966 after the Civil Rights Act passed in the United States. It's one of the few remaining structures that was in the Green Book that is still standing today. So we have to be very cautious. It is listed as a City of Orlando historic landmark, and it was in jeopardy of being destroyed. And there are so many places throughout the South where buildings, communities have been razed in the name of urban renewal or revitalization or gentrification or whatever you want to call it. So I'm very concerned about the direction. I think if we could put some safeguards, because I think this might even incentivize the owners of older structures to let them fall into disrepair so that they could be demolished, and the owner then would be free to build something newer with greater value. So I'm at a quandary, Senator, right now, because if you're talking about South Beach and the Art Deco hotels and all of that, and saying that they're unsafe and therefore we should just get a permit and demolish all of them, we're losing the historic properties in the state of Florida. We're losing one of the cultural, attractions, should be attractions here in the state of Florida, because in Florida, everybody wants something new. And we forget about St. Augustine. We forget it's the oldest city in the nation. And so we want something new, something trendy, and we don't capitalize on our history and the culture and the historic assets that we have in the state. So I hope you will address my concerns in your close, but I just have I lack comfort at this point. Thank you, Madam President.
Any further debate? Senator Avila, you recognize to close on the bill.
Thank you, Madam President, and senators. I'll tell you. Certainly, there's I think that this will be one of those issues where we're certainly going to continue to have those conversations into future sessions. I would tell you that we've seen an overreach by some of these boards that have been empowered by the local jurisdictions, where, in my opinion, those local jurisdictions, those municipalities, those local governments should have kept that power to make these decisions. With this bill, again, there's a criteria that needs to be met, right? One of them is obviously it needs to be in a FEMA coastal high hazard area, which fail to meet the FEMA standards. The building has to be deemed unsafe by the local building official in that jurisdiction, and it also has to be ordered to be demolished by that local building department. So, in none of these criteria am I taking away anything from the local government. What I'm saying is that the local government needs to focus on making those decisions and not empowering some of these boards, like we've seen in not just in Miami-Dade County, but in several other coastal areas. And with that, I'll tell you, we're certainly serving in the legislature. I think we're all extremely sensitive, and we're certainly very appreciative of our history and historical structures. But not all structures can be historical. I mean, that's the reality. Not all these structures have a historical significance, and some of them, with that coastal erosion, with natural disasters, they become hazardous. And my fear is that you have some of these boards that have been empowered that are essentially designating structures that have no historical significance. They are being designated as historic in a way to preserve whatever that structure is and to prevent the highest and best use for that property. So, with that, members, I encourage you to support this bill, and thank you, Madam President.
The Secretary will unlock the board, and senators will proceed to vote. Have all senators voted? Lock the board and record the vote.
33 yeas, 6 nays, Madam President.
Show the bill passes. Read the next bill.
Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 1480, a bill to be entitled An Act Relating to Grants for Nonprofit Organization Safety.
Senator of the 38th District, Senator Kaladiud, is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam President. Senate Bill 1480 creates the Florida State Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which would enhance physical security measures and develop a comprehensive approach to securing houses of worship and nonprofit organizations that are at high risk of violent attacks due to ideology, beliefs, or mission as specified. That is the bill, Madam President.
Are there amendments?
None on the desk, Madam President.
Are there questions on the bill?